Welcome to the Cree Talks podcast. I am your host, Michela Carriere. This is presented by AskiAdventures and Biggity Lodge. This is the first episode ever of Cree Talks podcast. Join me on my journey into learning the Cree language. I was inspired to make this podcast so I could listen back on Cree speakers talking in their first language as a method of learning. This is not so much an instructive podcast, but rather a podcast to hear personal and authentic stories in Cree with intertwined English translations. These translations are not always direct translations, but will help you practice your Cree listening skills. I have spent my life on the trap line, 60 kilometers from the nearest community of Cumberland House. This is where I've lived with my family. Our home is situated in the middle of the Saskatchewan River Delta, the largest inland delta in North America. The Saskatchewan River Delta is a diverse ecosystem of plants, birds, moose, fish, and countless other animals. This is where my family has been making a living on the land since before the fur trade. My dad and his family are Cree, and I have always listened to Cree stories being spoken my whole life. But I never learned the language due to spending more time with my wonderful English-speaking mother. So this is where the term mother tongue has meaning to me. But it is never too late to learn Cree. So here's some practice. Nina, Michela, nitsnigasun, wanigeo, opagetaha, miswe, na natugnetutuskan, Ota Taisipmachiswan. I'm Michela. I'm a trapper, fisherman. I do everything I can to make a living out here. So let's begin the Cree Talks podcast with my dad, Solomon Carriere. Welcome, Dad, to my show, Cree Talks podcast. Can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Tansi Solomon Carriere nitsniga sun umuta mista pigam wagu tsigayam yan ni mama gomba pa isniga swak William Carriere agad Josephine Carriere uta utsi egu tiu pigi tsik amista pigam wag ego. So, my name is Solomon Carriere. My parents are William and Josephine Carriere. They raised us here at Big Eddy and also Cumberland House, which is downstream from here. And this is where I'll be talking from.
So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was something really important to our family and to our lives. I want to talk about the moose hunt. So, Dad, how did your dad teach you about moose hunting?
How? Ni bapa oyo. Nagi pegis kinomaid kay semachi an. Usampu e kanop mak. Gamina. Naging dut dogma na atsimut. Ay semachi chik ay at semat muso umote taga wigi aguma umaski ego segi pesi gis kinoma sun egomina egi pesi nduto mbapa e atsimut taisi machi ya nego taisi gisteni magomuso. So my father was always working and very busy with making a livelihood for us. So sometimes we didn't have much time to hunt together, but through his stories of hunting and me watching him take people out and me also hunting with him, they have left a lasting impression on me how to hunt and how to respect the moose. So those are the things that my father, I got from my father for moose hunting and living with moose.
So one thing that you've talked with me many times in my past is about the ethics of hunting. So what can you tell me about the ethics of hunting from a Cree language perspective?
Hegoniu ba pao kapegi kia ya miu ta gistenema ag musa. Maga mi pegis kinoma kai sinistaino ago ki muso meno. Sa spinya peo ya pe sis human sis nu ses o nitsanu punas kus kaganoni ka winagik tagiskeni maguk kanistaino agu ma op maguk gatsi mina kanistai matak sa spingi matano musa kanistai na matak ya pesis human sis nu ses egusiagi pesigis knomait ba pa kagistenema agana musa kanistai noak ega pogisi gaisini pa ago musa. So my father was teaching me how to recognize the different moose, such as the big bull moose, the medium bull moose, the yearling, the calves, the cows with calves, and the cows without calves. They all had names. And with their names, we were shown how to track them. We were able to tell the track of a bull moose compared to a cow moose, compared to a dry cow, which is a cow without calves. So we were able to distinguish all these animals through the tracks and through when we seen them. So when we were out hunting, at whatever time it was, we were able to take the right animal, so we didn't decimate the moose itself. So we always left moose so they would continue to grow.
So, for example, how would you identify a dry cow?
Egutama no pun ba pa egatua musa gini pat nuse unitsania umapi pu eguta win nok egonima ka wi kaganistai not unitsania ki ganopa tenan mai siet skit kai sitagus ket ego ista anu se susampu pegan skanawe maga kita niskiti ni tawitsewa o suina nuses sa spin mo op mau human sis goni e uguana unitsanu muna mai na tap to ego sis panu askau ni paima o utsose me sa mai ga nagnita ni paio ga ni askau maga usampu witseawa suak gomina ga nistai no nots misigi tuina sa spina pete kiskoso ego unitsanu munui nego simittu ni ga isnago suta skuta kiskoso ego sipu kagisi nistai no awanu unitsanu kaga machitutot. It's difficult to tell a dry cow, which is a cow moose without a calf, compared to a cow that has calves. But through talking about it and being explained to from my father, it begins to show how you can tell. usually the season for that would be in the winter. That was the optimal time for somebody to hunt a dry cow would be in the winter, because that's when they're the most best shape. You start looking at their tracks, and their tracks are very similar, but with a cow, a dry cow, their tracks are sharper, they're closer together, and they make a nicer track because they're lighter usually. And a cow who gave birth to calves is usually a little bit more heavier, not all the time, but their tracks are made different. So through this process, you start recognizing those little details that you need to help you know that it's the difference between those two, because they're the same animal, they're a female, just that one has the calves. And also you start recognizing when you see them, but in some cases the wolves sometimes kill the calves, and the cow will be by herself. So when that happens, you have to try and look at what shape the cow is in. Does it look like she's carrying calves with her for the spring to have? And those are those little things that you start looking at. And then you can make the decision to harvest that animal if you have to. So if you were hunting these particular moose, you would try to select the dry cow, because you're only taking one moose instead of 3 moose.
So you've also talked about in the past, like the seasons of hunting. So what are those? What are the ethics around the seasons of hunting?
Goni ni papa o sampu mitone po sa aspin ki kin iga ke gono maga tia ine gutak kamachi yan sa spin ke gon getan kipeun pitamats kamachi yan munin ta pitau gemachi. So my father would only hunt when we needed the meat. So he expressed to me that only when you're in need of a moose that you were able to go out and harvest a moose. And if you had stuff, then you waited to hunt.
So those are some really important details, and it really shows that you have to develop a close relationship with the land to really understand it. So do you have a memorable moose hunting story you can tell us?
Igone kayas peg dayan mistegi egi machi an muse egi machi to go awaske so. Igone bapa egi punip matsit igone kagi teni taman tamachi an musay gatsi wa waske so gandeni pak ta ka wapat nak kiamu tega at ka wapat nak egi giskenomait. So yes, I have a memorable hunt that I had, that I went out to hunt a moose and an elk. It was because my father liked the elk and the moose. But when I went to hunt, I thought whichever animal comes to me, that's the animal I will harvest in my dad's honor, because he had showed me all the stuff that I knew to that point. And I just wanted to show him what he taught me So even though he was passed away, this was the hunt for him. Egoni amachi an. Umuta mista piga mogoni na timigute. Egutema namba pagisitse ogas como wawaskesia egute gaya chik. Musag mi negute ao. Egoni guta kanday miskan. Utan supe paen utan daye paen. Egoni gute tagutse mianan mai utagi wi tutian. Egoni gutan seski sine gutas sagak. One isay rutian. So I was here at Big Eddy, and after my father had passed away, I thought, okay, I will go and put to practice what he had taught me. So I paddled up river. I came to the spot where Dad and I used to hunt for elk and moose, and I went quite far into the woods. Egoni that tiseski sine gutau pinis that titagus nene guten that tigagit to amusa tigagit to hawa waske su in dutaman piniska pet dog wa waske su taskuch wana is titago su maga se magna skosi spigagit dog. So as I walked in the woods, I was calling moose, I was calling elk. I heard an elk answer me quite far in the distance, but he answered me. He answered my call. Ngoni o pawaske sua pet dog. Ngagit tuaw, gutenda titu tan and then nagiskok. Matika nagiskok. Ani mai tati rutian te papas ko, ego minas sagao. En tunamanan mai tagapas ko, ego tagape ago, wawaske suape tuitat. So as I walked in the woods, I was looking for this little opening in the woods that my father and I had walked before. Ego ni, ego ta beto wawaske su. Kisiok pinis at the peo, pegit tuaska igeo, pegagit tut minutago su. Egoni stegut an naskosia o tatoagit tut. Nista yung tuaska igan miteska nang dago now. So as I was in this little opening in the woods, as I called the elk, as he called back to me, as he scraped the trees, I could just feel the excitement of that hunt that I was having with my father, even though he was gone. As the elk approached, he was making more noise, rubbing his antlers against the trees. And as he did that, I did the same. Egutan dayanan ma paskogan munamya agi pasko. Piniski siogo pete tao ya wawaske su. Egun tene ma ugu tatago sinistam. Egun nap mo. Datsa pi. Egun dagaskok. Ep mutai ke ganiuchi ka machi an. So as I was getting excited of this elk making noise and coming so close. With me, I had my bow and my arrows. Egoni, katatin. Ya peo, kisiogu takagi tut. Utanak muchi, penasit. And all of a sudden, from behind me, a moose was calling, coming towards me. Egone gutta, sawanuge se, kisioke gutta wawaske su. Hiet nuge se, eguttam ya peo. Egone egusines ngita swan. Ba pa mi ne gusigi tigma na. Sa spin giop ma no awas ke su hati musa. Anan istam tagusigi. Eugu kautenano itteu. So as I wait in that field with the elk to my south, I hear the moose to the north, and they're very close. And as they come, I can hear my dad's voice saying, if the elk comes, we will take the elk. If the moose comes, we'll take the moose. Whichever comes first, you allow the other animal to go. Igoni, atipagi simon. Iguta. Beun pinis kisiwago musa. Igoni kisioge tipeat. Da tu chi ganapin. Gata pasut nina. Inis nuge sioge peat. So as I stood in that little meadow, that little opening, the moose was closer. And as he took his steps and he rubbed his antlers, as he came towards me, taking his cautious steps, I knelt down to take my scent down to the ground. Igoni o musa, pinisk, uta, o gut, penuga nu gut nistam. Igoni utes kanani, igutas sagi gapayo. Ayupo ni opa tamonos tegonego. Hagan op makisiok. Ni op mau utena ni. At kago ego se siep and aga gois big etapit. So as I knelt there, I could see the moose, his nose first, then his antlers, and I'm feet away from him, very close. I could see him with his tongue tasting the air around him to try and get the scent of this moose that was calling back to him. But it was me he could sense. Hegoni, hawa musa, haganop mak, garate, asupe patat. Maga, ni papa ngiptik sa spinegusitu tamuso semak. Semak agit wow kiteo. Ispiga na musa supe patat semak kagit tuak. No pu hegusi se tegaswan betak ki pizze paniu. Hegutagi pizzi ukisiok munawano. So as the moose senses me, he bolts out of the woods. And my father had said to me, if you're in a spot like this, when the moose starts running, you call. And that's why I called. I went, very loud, which is usually not what you do, but it gets the attention of the moose. And as I did that, within very few feet of me, the moose stopped and looks at me. Iwanyo musa, eguta ki pizze paniu, ganop mik. Iwani, kaut nagon da gask. Iwan da cha panana, da cha pio, Egutan danao nanda gas kasagwata piu. Hewani kau chipit tagon datsa pi. Hewani awanap magomusa. Egutagya pinganop ni wanap mau. Hewani uspigaganta nap mo kay tenita man. Hewani au chipit tagon da gas datsa piu tin lu chipit tao. Eguta gaska piwana. And as I called the moose stopped. He looks at me, and I bring my bow up with my arrow ready. And I look at the moose, and I aim where the ribs are, and I pull back, and I let my arrow fly. Hegoni, a pagitiep na datsa pan spines o pego chigon dagas. Tan simi no awa dagas spin ta sku a spine tawa ho musa a spine go te pagisi egutanga yepa ho Guskupanin egayepo munegusin taispanu. Pitamata pasi omu sa taot. Onia tia peu onego tani mati puni matsu. Maga omu sanina mok se magegota. Goyepo se magegota naspita ho. So when I let my arrow go, I thought I was shooting where you're supposed to shoot them, just above the ribs. And as my arrow went, and to my shock, when the arrow hit the moose fell down right on the spot. Usually they go for a ways with the arrow and you wait, and then you get the animal and you retrieve it. But this moose fell on the spot. Egoni ni muso mo ni ganop magota kisyog ni tiga pa isto egota punip matsu enaspit tok. Egoni kana tago muso. Oni ganop mag matite tao tan simina. Mittonian tayo at tao hugayak. Mittoni pittige panu. Pitta kisyogu tatamis tegona ni magastenik. Hani manego takap mot munamo segus ispanu. Egu taga taot muso kanipat kitagas kumutsi. I walk to my moose. I'm shocked to see where the arrow is. It's below his head. The arrow had entered into the spine below the brain. And this is not the place that you aim for a bow. Egonia ganop magon dagos kita pit. Egonia itenit taman. Ba pawagi witsi hit. Egutei si witsi atani dagas koga isitawo magani musa. Egutse o musa ka naspit tok. Egata gota gitat. Ego kasam ego isian mina. Ba pawa. Egi pesigis knomai taisimachian. So as I look at my arrow and I see where the arrow is, I'm thankful that the arrow did its job so quick. But I'm also feeling that my father was there to guide that arrow to a place that it would take the moose instantly. So it would be quick. And it also would feed my family. So I was thankful to my father for I guess for showing me all those little things that I needed to know for the hunt. Ngoni na nasko maomba pa. Homo senipak esa meguisian. So I was thankful to my father to receive this moose because it was because of his teachings that I was able to harvest this moose and in his honor.
Thank you for sharing that story, Dad. That's a very emotional and thoughtful story. It really shows how important moose hunting is for our family and for our spirit too. In closing up this discussion, what do you want to teach the next generation about moose hunting?
Ngoni oge anotso oge skip mat sago oge ga matsi chik kage giskino maso chik taisia kistene ma mo sag munami chet diaga notes. So now with the future hunters that we have, I just want them to teach themselves about how the moose replenishes itself so we can harvest with good management practices. And I know it's a bit more harder to do that now, but it's possible. Anots oge nots kimi zetna anons anotsoma. Maga saspin ke gaskita no gaskino mas wa kaisi gistene ma ke piskimena na go ke ka witsama go mota ka samegwa go e won ma ute tini gan nots ko pigi to ni musak e go wisto uge an sinyak mitsawwa go wisto ho kagasita o kamachi chikta sku kagi pesimachi a ninnan gomina ke te go kayas. So I'm hoping that we start thinking about how to hunt respectively so that our moose populations can survive and thrive, so that everybody that practices these traditions that we have will keep on. So if we can manage our hunts better and look at what we have more and the respect that some of these animals need, then I think we can continue to harvest moose into the future. Because there's more of us now. There's more people now. So we really have to watch how we hunt and use the resources around us.
Thank you for sharing your time with us and experiences with us too, Dad. It's very important to keep the Cree language and teachings alive through talking. So that was my guest, Solomon Carriere. If you want, check out his Instagram page at King Sol Video. He has some beautiful pictures of his life out on the trapline. Thanks to our audience for listening to the first episode of Cree Talks podcast. I'm your host, Michela Carriere. Please share your feedback to AskiAdventures@gmail.com. That's ASKI adventures@gmail.com. Thank you. Egose.